sign in one of the sheets? You guys all signed in? Yeah, even if you don't, and you shouldn't even drink stuff, like, we got all these drinks, or you all take, unless I have to carry in, so, that's much appreciated. All right, well, I guess we'll go ahead and get started. Our round table is around me, or virtually, or in person. I thought I'd give a brief overview, just because not everyone may be familiar with some of the topics we're going to talk about tonight. But again, we are going to talk about college athletics, mainly conference realignment, and how that may all shake out for Kansas State in the future. I've had some of these slides for years. I'm going to reuse some of them, and so I'm going to reuse some of these slides and then kind of build up with some new things. I just thought this is kind of interesting because this is the history of really the Big 8, the Big 12, and it's kind of a pretty little slide there. But you see, you have the Big 6 from 1928 gradually add teams and formed a stable conference for 68 years, and then a lot of these schools, several of these schools, were a part of the Missouri Valley prior to the Big 6. So some of these schools were even playing together prior to 1928. The Big 12 forms in 1996, seems to be a little bit of an inconvenient marriage, but seemed to be relatively stable, adding Texas Tech, TCU, Texas Tech, Baylor, and Texas A&M. And that conference lasted in its form for 14 years. In 2010, Nebraska and Colorado left the conference. And in 2011, Texas A&M and Missouri left the conference. Nebraska going to the Big 10, Colorado to the Pac, then 12 from 10 to 12. And then Texas A&M and Missouri going to the Southeastern Conference, with West Virginia and TCU being added. So still relative stability. I put this up, and honestly, USA Today is now behind a paywall, and I didn't have it quickly, but this is just, these numbers would be even more astounding today. If you look at the growth of college athletics budgets in the last 10 to 15 years, it's pretty amazing. I've been teaching sports econ since 2008 approximately, and K-State's budget then was about $30 million. As of 2019, it was 95 million. I'd say it's over 100 now. I'm pretty confident of that. And so the numbers keep going up, and that's why all of a sudden this instability has occurred. College athletics is no longer kind of a side avocation. It's huge money, big business, and every school, whether they admit it or not, is looking to position themselves the best, not just to compete athletically, but to bring in the most revenue. Kind of hypocritically, college athletic departments are considered to be nonprofits, but they sure try to maximize revenue. So here's the recent history of the Big 12 and other conferences. August 2021, Texas and Oklahoma kind of suddenly announced they're leaving the conference. Supposedly effective 2025. We had a big discussion about this. I think it's reasonably safe to say now that in all probability they won't leave before 2024. There may be disagreement about that, but it appears that will happen in 2024 or 2025. The Big 12 responded, I would argue, pretty positively, welcoming Brigham Young, Central Florida, Cincinnati, and Houston to join the conference. At BYU, we knew we were going to join right away in 2023, and now the other schools have worked out things with the American Athletic Conference to join effective next year. But then the big bombshell, when I thought we were done with this topic for maybe a year, we've done this the last 2 years. And then all of a sudden in July, out of really kind of nowhere, although you could see it coming, Andrew could talk about that. Southern California and UCLA have announced their plans to leave the Pac-12 conference and join the Big 10 in 2024. Seismic shift, not just because of the power of the Big 10 and their TV contract, but the potential destabilization of the Pac-12, and that can affect the Big 12, obviously. So here's some, I had these future dates, and I kept up some of my errors. I was like, oh, it's not a big deal that the Big 10 TV contract is up in 2025. And then all of a sudden they poached USC and UCLA, and that became relatively unimportant. And their new contract is only through 2030. The Pac-12 being up for renewal was a big deal then. It's still a big deal now. The Big 12 is actually opening their TV negotiations early to kind of, I would argue, compete with the Pac-12 in that regard. And there is some instability issues in the Pac-12 that we'll talk about. SEC TV contracts are up for renewal in 2034. They're packaged in with ESPN. Andrew and I both think they made a big mistake not sticking with multiple networks such as CBS. But because the SEC sees this monster money for the Big Ten, it's very, I would say almost entirely likely that when Texas and Oklahoma join, they'll reconfigure their conference schedule from 8 conference games to 9 conference games. And that will kind of at least open up revenue potential with ESPN, where they can at least not be too far behind the Big Ten with TV money. And then 2036, one of the reasons there hasn't been this massive shift in conferences is because the ACC schools, for now at least, seem to be tied into their TV agreement, which is not the greatest, through that year and their agreement with Notre Dame. So what was I wrong about? I mean, again, I was talking about this. Huge money, $1 billion a year on average for the Big Ten TV contracts, starting in 2023 and running through 2030. Now, the current plan is for USC and UCLA to not join the Big Ten until 2024, but that's still, that's part of the deal. They wanted to get into Los Angeles. Those are the 2 big California schools in terms of the television presence, and it was a big move by the Big Ten. They were really the only conference that wanted to and would make it. I don't think the SEC has any real interest in going that far west, based on their geographic footprint. So that's a big thing, and it could destabilize the Pac-12. We're obviously going to look at this from a K-State perspective. There are some things that have happened that I think are good for the relative stability of the Big 12 and for K-State athletics. One, the playoff expansion going from 4 teams to 12 teams starting in 2024. ESPN gave up their future monopoly on that TV contract, but they have that TV contract through 2025. So the first 2 years, that will be an ESPN family of networks, ABC exclusive. And then in 2026, there'll be other teams. The Alliance, I think the good news is that it was all a joke, right? The Alliance, last year we talked about the Alliance where the Pac-12, the ACC, and the Big Ten came up with all these lofty goals of kumbaya, and we're all about academics. We don't care about the money. And honestly, at this point, that appears to just be a way to put the Pac-12 at ease before the Big Ten went in and poached their teams. And the Pac-12 leadership under Larry Scott was dismal, and that was taken advantage of by other players. So the instability of the Pac-12 creates opportunities for the Big 12, I think we'll talk about that. That revenue, we're looking at about $2 billion a year on average TV money, probably, which is double the NCAA basketball tournament, which has been the big revenue generator in college athletics. So, and then we always kind of talk about this. I put together this slide in 2017. What were the best expansion candidates for the Big 12? We've been talking about this in sports econ for years. Nate Silver did an estimate of TV presence of these different teams. I don't think it's all that perfect by any means. I think we have a model that's much better, actually, that I need to work with Andrew to get published here. But that does carry some weight. And I rated these teams how I felt like they'd be attracted to the Big 12 in 2017, 2018. BYU, Central Florida, Cincinnati were at the top of that list. Those are the teams we added. Houston was considered then, still considered today. There's some positives there. There's commuter school. There's some negatives in my opinion, but that's the one I think is probably the most questionable of the 4 that was added, but there are reasons for that, getting into Texas and all that. The teams that got away at the time, Louisville is in the ACC, so they're locked in for a while, but as Tim has talked about for years, Arizona and Arizona State, we thought we missed out, perhaps not. The one thing I wanted to say is this whole alliance thing, I remember why I wrote this in the slide. The Pac-12 thought the alliance was real. So last year, the Big 12 was very vulnerable a year ago, and the Pac-12 probably, I would argue, could have gotten some schools from the Big 12. And they've been super aggressive and thoughtful about capitalizing on the instability of Texas and Oklahoma leaving the league. Pac-12 thought, we have this alliance, we're good. We really don't want to associate with these schools that we may not relate to philosophically or academically, and now it's their loss. So that's a rambling thing. I probably went way too long. Here are the things I thought would be good questions for our panel, and I'm going to try not to be too talky from this point forward, but I thought we'd give an introduction. What? Yeah, well, I can't help myself, but we'll do our best. And so these are the questions that you may have or we may bring up, but I wanted to introduce our speakers very briefly. As we mentioned, Andrew Maness, research associate at the Richmond Fed, was just a start of a massively successful career as one of the founders of Pitrow AI, which I think it's now fair to say is sold.
Yeah, it's public knowledge.
Public knowledge, sold to General Motors. He can talk about some of what he did there, but incredibly successful story. I'd like to say he has it to our sports econ class, but he doesn't. He did amazing things on his own. Tim Fitzgerald's the editor and publisher of Go Power Cat, which is the largest K-State, I'm certain the largest K-State fan site. I can't say. Okay, it's the biggest and the best, and is very successful in covering Kansas State athletics. So he has as much of a K-State knowledge as anyone. So that's why we've included him. Vahe Gregorian has a lot of Kansas State knowledge as covering it, really not just off, just on, I guess, for what, 35 years? I don't know. But writes the Kansas City Star, formerly from the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, award-winning, all kinds of stuff, covered 8 Olympics. Why? What is it? A lot of Olympics and a lot of
10 if you must know.
10 Olympics. See, I was selling it short on purpose to build up. And so kind of a national sports writer and has that perspective. So yeah, I'll kind of turn it over to each one of them, if they have any introductory remarks, let them say them. And then this is kind of a free flow thing. So we have an audience here. We'd love to get questions. So I don't know, Andrew, you're standing next to me. I don't know.
Yeah, I can.
All right, tell a little bit about your background.
Pass this around.
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier in our econ meeting, I started out of grad school at the Federal Reserve Bank. I was a research assistant there. And in parallel, I started a stand right here in the middle. Okay, perfect. Yeah. And so in parallel to working at the Fed, I started a website called NASCARnomics. I did a lot of motorsports analytics, and it was really a focus on the business side. So what I've always found fascinating about sports business is that a lot of these teams are, when we talk about maximizing utility in econ, that's not maximizing profit for a lot of them. Their goal is to win championships, and more championships, the better. So it's fascinating to me that all the revenue they get would be poured back into the cost side. So profit would always be zero. And so I just, from an economic standpoint, I think it's really fascinating. So I started that. It got acquired by Pitrow in the very end of 2013, which is a software company that specializes in real-time motorsports analytics. And when I got acquired by them, we started venturing into other sports, including sports within motorsports, so IndyCar, Formula One, sports cars, and then beyond motorsports. We worked with the NBA, Major League Baseball. Never quite got in the NFL, which kind of regret it, but it's probably the biggest sports series in America. Probably it unequivocally is. So we worked on a lot of media rights stuff with one network, say ESPN, to help them broker their IndyCar media rights deal, and after that, the media rights deal that IndyCar has with NBC. So during that time, we built out a really massive data set of all these media rights agreements, including ones from the Big 12, the SEC, and so on, to build a model to estimate reasonably, but not perfectly, the value of these various deals that I'm sure we'll touch on today. And over the last several years, we kept expanding, particularly in motorsports, to the point where General Motors saw a lot of value into one of our applications that we had built almost a decade ago. And we worked the last couple of years in getting that acquisition done, and it was finally done in April of this year, and then it was announced about two to 3 weeks ago publicly. So yeah, that's kind of what I've been up to the last 10 years.
Well, this is what I've been up to the last 10 years. You can see from the timeline they put up that this all started in 2010, 11. And this is the first round of conference realignment where the Big 12 has been in an advantageous position. They're the hunter, not the hunted. So it's different covering it from this perspective. It's a lot less terrifying when you're making your living off of covering sports. I feel horribly for my friends at Washington State and Oregon State, Because if this all shuffles out like we think it will eventually, it might be a year, might be 5 years. Those two will probably be, in soccer terms, relegated down to the Mountain West because nobody wants them. One, because it's essentially K-State and Iowa State, but in the far northwest corner of the United States. So geography, while it doesn't seem like it plays much role in this anymore, if you're adding LA to the Big Ten, it actually does in some ways. So if you're gonna add another far-flung corner to your conference, it better be worth it. Washington and Oregon, and not their state schools. It's just how the business is working, but there's a lot to be shaken out so far, still coming. It kind of is quiet down, but I'm hearing a lot of rumblings that behind the scenes, the poor Pac-12 is being divvied up and doesn't know what's happening. But that's kind of on brand for the Pac-12. We don't know what's going on. Everyone's our friend, but they're not. Go ahead.
I like that, Tim. That so speaks to the general climate. Everyone's our friend, but they're not. And I think we learned that in an unforgettable way in that pretty seismic round of all this in 2010, 11, 12. And I guess I've never lost that feeling, like that the trap door is always there. You know, it is funny. We're sitting here, we're speaking at a great institution of higher education, and it sometimes it seems so secondary to what these behemoths have become. And we could say this is all kind of new, but you know, we've had plenty of people warning us about the state of college athletics and over commercialization, things of that nature for a good 100 years or so. It's just that it's so ramped up through so many different vehicles now. And if I sound a little cynical about it, I suppose I really am. I mean, it's just such a chase of the dollar. And when Tim, you used the term relegation, it made me think about it more in the context of European soccer. Like, you're gonna start having this kind of churn happen at some point. I'm rambling, but Dan, you taught me how. The only other thing I'd add right now is it's impossible for me to project exactly what the end game is, right? It seems like we're in an ever lasting state of flux. I suppose I still think that this is headed towards some breakaway from under the NCAA's grasp, because football is really run by the conferences, not by the NCAA. And when you don't know what's going on from conference to conference, let alone under the umbrella of the NCAA, it's really hard to see this structure staying as it is. Now, having said it the way I just did, what the breakaway looks like and how much more reliable that is, or stable that is, that's a whole nother question.
And again, anytime you have questions, just hold your hand up and Michelle will get you the microphone. But I might add a little bit to that. I kind of stress the 12-team playoff being a big news story recently. And some people might say, well, the Big 12 probably won't be represented as well in most years in the playoffs than, say, the SEC. But the seat at the table and the opportunity to compete for national championships, which at one point it appeared might be kind of shaky, is a huge step towards expanding the number of teams that are going to be part of the haves and not the have-nots, and the number of conferences that are going to be part of the haves and the have-nots. And there may be ordering of those conferences. They may be stable over time. They may change over time. But and make no mistake, there's two reasons that they agree. These primarily the big power players, or the Big Ten and the Southeastern Conference, in terms of being able to, go where they want and do what they want, and then negotiating from a position of power. There was two reasons that they went along with this 12-team playoff, in my opinion. I think it's pretty straightforward. One is the pool of money is huge, and they're going to get their share of it, if not more. But second is they were going to be open to some real antitrust concerns from the teams that had viable programs and would not be included in this thing. And the history of sports, we talked about in our sports econ class, a few of you are here from there. That antitrust going back to 1982 when the University of Oklahoma and the University of Georgia sued the NCAA to have the right to broadcast their own television rights, as the NCAA was violating antitrust, and they clearly were. That has set a precedent that people don't want to get involved with. And so I feel better about Kansas State's future, and I know Tim mentioned this too, today than I did a year ago. And it's due to this. I think this playoff expansion is going to settle the waters at least a little bit. Not to say that teams won't continue to. I think, as Tim also said, I think we might see more movement from Pac-12 schools in the not so distant future. But and maybe that makes you want to, I don't know, that get your attention to say something else or not. But,
We're not adding UNLV, so I don't care. You're not adding Vegas. What's in it for me?
Vegas and Tulane's a sore subject around here, but New Orleans wouldn't be bad either. But yeah. But yeah, go ahead. And Michelle will take you the mic there. Make sure it's on. And go ahead and introduce yourself.
Let's see. Oh, perfect. Hi, I'm Zach. I'm a PhD student. My question is more on the recruiting side of stuff. So I played college football in undergrad at a small D3 school. So like I understand a lot of what's going on in the college football world, but what do you guys think about how the concentration of colleges in the SEC and more towards the eastern side of the country is going to affect recruiting? Because I know a lot of successful recruiting in Alabama and all of those bigger schools usually starts at the local regional level and then works its way out to national. But those bigger schools also have more of that pull. So would recruiting be affected in the sense of like there's more across the country competition because everybody's more in one conference, or like what are your projections on that from that perspective?
We'll let Tim start with that, I think.
Well, it's a great question. The SEC is so bound to their region because it's the most talent-rich area of the country. Good weather, year-round football, part of the culture, to produce the most players. And so they're at an advantage just there because you drive 200 miles and find more recruits in Kansas State will see in a year. I mean, that's the truth of the situation. But what this realignment's causing is people are getting unbound from their traditional recruiting bases. Nebraska, they recruited Texas, California, and through the Midwest, and then they left the Big 8, Big 12 to go to the Big 10, and now they're trying to recruit the upper Midwest where other schools are established as recruiting institutes. And I contend that that's a big reason why they're struggling. They still get some players from those regions, but it's not as active for them. You're right, the West has fewer high schools, fewer players. And honestly, I don't feel like culturally football is as valued to student athletes as it is in other parts of the country, like Texas in the Southeast and New Jersey and Ohio, some of those other traditional football states. And so if you're relying on California for recruiting, you might be in trouble. And we see that with the results of the Pac-12 conference not competing at the highest levels. So yeah, I can see a big reason why, and nobody's talking about it. Arizona and Arizona State, maybe Utah, Colorado possibly would want to come into the Big 12 because it opens up Texas to them. Now they're in a conference with Texas schools. The players can go home to play once in a while. Mom and dad, it's not that long a trip to those places compared to other places. So yeah, I think recruiting is kind of a silent factor in all this. And I'm betting we're going to see some problems with USC and UCLA unhinging themselves from the LA market and going so far east. I think they're going to have some real recruiting challenges.
And one thing I'd add to that, a lot of people are of the opinion that this name, image, and likeness, which you're not familiar with, is the ability, at least informally, to pay players. I mean, theoretically, for letting people cash in on their market value of their name. But, a lot of very thinly disguised offers from schools are tied into going to a particular school and getting that name, image, and likeness money. A lot of people will say to me, that's going to be terrible for K-State. That's going to be, bad for the non-Alabamas of the world. And I've never felt that way. I think for one, there's the ability to prioritize recruits. You know, and we have a collective here. All these schools have collectives that are kind of funding money towards certain players. You have the ability to demonstrate, you know, how much, literally how much you're valuing a particular player, and then you're going to get your share when someone's at the top of your list and they're at, you know, you may not go to Alabama to be the third quarterback when you can come, you know, here to be the first quarterback, or, you know, Texas Tech or wherever it might be our future opponent this weekend. So I feel like that actually, you know, it will keep the haves way up there getting the top players, but I don't know that it's going to distribute talent. I think it might distribute talent a little bit more equally in the main. And I think that's kind of a counterintuitive thing for some people.
Hey, Dan, can I just jump in with something on that? I don't know if you guys remember what was it, the comment that Jimbo Fisher from Texas A&M made about a year ago when he said, there's always been name, image, and likeness payments, just that it's legal now. And I bring that up not just to be flip, but to say that to get at the question of getting our arms around that, despite the fact some things have kind of become more clear, I still feel like it's a little bit of a wild, wild west concept there, where the loophole is the rule. And, you know, theoretically, you're not able to say, if you come here, you'll get this. But of course, you're saying if you come here, you'll get this. And I just do wonder in the big picture sense, and Andrew, maybe it's something you can speak to, how you think that the financing of all this will play out against this canvas of the realignment. I mean, all these things are moving parts all at once.
Yeah, I tend to agree with what Dr. Keister said about this, where it's not, you know, I don't want to use the word reset because the haves are, you know, Alabama's still going to win a few national titles every decade, not a few, at least a couple, but it's going to give a K-State an opportunity. It's going to give Texas Tech an opportunity to get some of those second or third string position players at an SEC school. So I've kind of been in the camp, and we're seeing anecdotally some evidence of that. There's a little more parity, especially toward the bottom end of the Power 5 conferences. So the Big 12 and the Pac-10, namely, they haven't been the Pac-10 in years, the Pac-12. So I think it's generally a positive, but to your point about it being a Wild West situation, that's what worries me the most. I just don't know how long that's going to last until the market reaches some sort of steady state, right? Because over time, we know we're going to get there. We just don't know when, and until we reach that, I'm always going to be nervous about it. So
What I find interesting about the NIL is I don't think it's going to have the effect people intended. If you're out there on the recruiting trail and you offer a kid, the schools can't do it. It's a collective of alumni mostly. Offers a kid $1 million to come to your school, and then he's getting to play ahead of players maybe that aren't getting paid, but they're better, or he's getting paid and not playing because he's not earning the time. I think it's going to destroy locker rooms. And I think we're already seeing some of that go on with, well, you just parked a Lamborghini in the parking lot, quite literally at Texas. There's a running back with a Lamborghini. And while he's really good, maybe poor guy got a ticket though. Yeah, maybe, yeah, how dare they? Maybe the next guy, you know, the other running back's parking his old pickup truck because he's from some podunk town in Texas, but he's better. And what kind of tension will that cause? I think the bigger factor here is the transfer portal. And if you want to understand the impact and the effect of kids being able to leave and choose and go to another school in the course of 1 year, which has always been banned by the NCAA, look at the University of Kansas. They were awful. They're 4-0 this year. They hit the transfer portal and found a bunch of kids that fit. So, I mean, that's the big X factor. That's equalizing the bottom, because now the third stringer at Alabama can start at Kansas, and he's a really good football player, and he can play.
I've got a question for you, Tim, about a lot of these NIL units. Can you talk about
the range or the spread of them? So within one program,
what's the smallest to the largest, comparing the median to the average? How does all of that work?
It's a great question, but we don't know because they're private agreements. They're private contracts between a company or a nonprofit is the new trick they're using. And now there's legislation to get rid of that. You can't claim to be a nonprofit. The trick is, I think it was, Texas set this up, their offensive linemen set up a nonprofit where the kids have to send out one social media post about Texas, you know, how great it is, or whatever the charity work this nonprofit does. And they get paid, I don't know, 25K. I mean, now I know my tweets are worth that, but I'm not sure theirs are. It's just interesting. You just have to have one little action. I can pay you. Send one tweet out, here's 25K. That's nuts. And that's not how nonprofits supposed to work.
And just to add to the discussion of NIL, you know, it's a constantly evolving thing, obviously, and we're still new to it. But I can see a day where things get collectively bargained at the college athletics level. It's going to be, there would almost have to be a separation from the universities themselves where they kind of lease out the trademarks and all that. And then you have an independent company kind of running college athletics. At that point, you can negotiate collective bargaining, which you have in professional sports leagues. And, you know, everybody says to me, well, Keister, you know, I hate it that these players leave so much and they travel so much. It's like, well, they're students. Theoretically, they're like any other student. How would you like it if I told you you couldn't, you may love it here. Most of us do. We're all here. We're having a great time. But if you didn't, if I limited your ability to go to school somewhere else, that would seem wrong. That would seem unfair. And so we're going to have to, at some point, get our hands and our arms around what this really is, which is at least a pseudo professional sport, if nothing else. And it's going to have to be negotiated that way. And that's going to be a difficult transition to see happen, but I do think it will almost have to eventually happen. Maybe Vahe can add to that. I don't know.
No, nothing with any more clarity or insight than you had, Dan.
I do think that, I mean, one of the scenarios we talked about, all this realignment, and let's not pretend that it's the conferences back in the background plotting, steal each other. It's the television networks that are pulling the strings here. It's ESPN and Fox have kind of decided, I'm the SEC and I'm the Big Ten. And while they claim to be good friends and, you know, getting along here, they're at war and they're trying to own the college football market, and the Pac-12 is the next battleground. And with that, there's been an expression by some ESPN executives that there should be a higher level of college, semi-pro, basically. At that point, you're right. You probably are leasing out your name as a university to an entity to run a professional, semi-professional franchise. At that point, it's not college athletics anymore. And I've contended that if the Big Ten and SEC go that course, the ACC, Big 12, if the Pac rolls around, and all the other group of 6 conferences should say, see you guys, we're not playing you anymore. You're no longer college athletics, you're professional. And we don't play the NFL, we're not playing you either. And I think we could see a break in the NCAA at that point. I don't think the NCAA will be around much longer.
Well, and again, you talk about, you know, the NCAA just penalized Memphis for multiple recruiting violations. University of Memphis, not a big time, you know, they're not one of the major players, and the penalty they got is laughable. The NCAA right now is afraid to anger any of its members in any real sense, no matter how much they may have quote unquote cheated. If you go by NCAA rules, they've cheated, because they know that they may not be on borrowed time. I mean, maybe they'll just continue to capitulate to what the schools want, but they kind of have to, because it's, you know, there is this ability for the schools that there's so much money involved to say, we don't need to share this with the Lindenwoods of the world and the people that are, you know, not at the biggest level. So there, and again, what Tim brought up is certainly a possibility. I mean, there's a lot of uncertainty. It just seems like for all the noble statements of university presidents and athletic directors, everybody seems to want to stay on the money train. And that, you know, tends to lean toward whatever the biggest level of competition is. And so, and I think it's worth mentioning, just because I think some of you would be interested in this. I mean, we've kind of referenced this, the stability of the Pac-12 conference is by far the weakest of the what we would call the Power Five right now. And there, you know, there's at least rumblings that Washington, Oregon, Stanford, California possibly could still join the Big Ten, probably at a reduced rate of revenue, but much more than they would get in the Pac-12. And you might say, well, Stanford and California may not move the needle that much, Berkeley. But that's also, there's so many moving parts of this, but the big prize is still Notre Dame. Notre Dame would like to associate itself with the top academic schools that they can. And so a school like Stanford that would really, I would argue, not be worth very much money if it wasn't for the potential that they could go to the Big Ten and lure Notre Dame in, has kind of an interesting negotiating situation. But as Tim said earlier, there's really, I don't think any real credible talk of anyone rating the Big 12 anytime soon. Kansas may think they're attractive enough to the Big Ten to go, but the phone hasn't seemed to ring after they publicly were looking for that for some time. So it's kind of the Big 12 is valuable, but not like so valuable that these teams are probably going to leave anytime soon.
What's kind of behind all this, like I said, it's all television. And if you look at that, was it 538?
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, he was at the Times at the time.
Okay, but if you look at the study that's out there that came out, any Pac-12 school that they'd add beyond the LA schools in the Big Ten would be in the lower half of the value of their instance. Now, Oregon and Washington kind of move it, Arizona State kind of moves it, but not a great deal. But here's the value, and here's why the Big 12 will go west, whether that's with the Four Corners schools, which I listed earlier, or maybe a San Diego State, which is kind of a growing school out west that gets you into the Southern California market. There are three main windows. We know it around here in Central Time Zone is 11 a.m., 2:30, and then about 6, that evening kickoff. Well, in the Pac-12, you've got the late, you got the fourth window. And right now, they're the only Power 5 conference to be able to fill that fourth window. And they branded it the Pac-12 After Dark. All the gamblers watch it. All the night owls watch it. If you're hammered drunk after Eggville, there must probably a game still going on. There's value in it. Does that slot have the same value as 1, 2, and 3? No, it doesn't. But you can't replicate it in any other way without getting it. And that's what the new Big 12 commissioner is looking at, Brett Yormark. He's looking at a conference that will quite literally be able to fill all 4 windows for any broadcast entity that would like their rights. And the Pac-12 can't fill the first window unless they want to kick off at 9 a.m., which they've actually done, to be in that first window, which is actually turning out to be really valuable. As much as we hate 11 a.m. kickoffs, everyone that's a college football fan is like, yeah, 11 a.m., let's go. Here's the first kicks. They're all watching, and we're seeing big ratings come out of that time slot. So that's where the Pac-12's weakness is. Now the Big 12 can benefit by maybe adding schools that Arizona as a football entity doesn't do much for you. They're a basketball school, actually, but being able to have those late kicks. I mean, BYU Baylor played this year, non-conference game. It'll be a conference game starting next year. And it had the biggest ratings in that late night slot in more than 10 years, 14 years or something. So there's value, particularly when you crossbreed a central time zone with a Western time zone, you get 2 different viewing groups there.
Yeah, I think what Tim mentioned about the windows for these games is critical. And I know Dr. Keister and I are working on a paper that incorporates that. That's not the focal point of it, but it reflects in the data exactly what Tim said. All of those slots on Saturday, at least, there's really not a major difference in viewership, all else being equal within this model. In other words, how many people watch the game is driven by a bunch of other stuff. That time slot is really not all that important. Now, if you're doing a Wednesday or Thursday night game, yeah, then it's going to matter. But if you're playing on Saturday, all those slots matter statistically about equally, not perfectly equally. And I wanted to get both of your guys' opinion on it. There's several reasons the Big Ten can go after USC and then eventually, Stanford or a Berkeley. That gives them access to that nightcap slot that they currently don't have, right? Like that adds to their inventory, and they've got 3 major networks now. 'Cause they're going to be doing Fox, CBS, and NBC.
And then they're also streaming on
Yeah.
Peacock and streaming
Yeah.
on, so they've got multiple streaming partners and multiple broadcast partner.
Yeah, so all of a sudden, the Big Ten, if they wanted to, they could air an 11 PM Eastern kickoff on FS1 with USC or UCLA. So I think that was a really, admittedly, a smart decision on their part, so.
And if they did expand, there's at least still ESPN, may be able to get a smaller piece of Big Ten TV rights if they were to continue to expand out west. That's something that's kind of up in the air. I want to mention something Tim brought up though also. We were kind of jumping around obviously, but since I've been here, leadership in the Big 12 has been unsteady, to be polite, and reactionary. And the Brett Newmark, I don't know that much. I mean, his background, Jay-Z, is that right? Like, yeah, like, yeah, but just like all sorts of connections with new media and new thinking, and the Big 12 is actually being proactive instead of reactive. Tim has brought this up, and the San Diego State thing got mentioned. There's some real advantages in the Big 12 potentially adding San Diego State, just because they're in a valuable media market. They're kind of getting their facilities together. And if you do destabilize the Pac-12, that's almost certainly the first place they're going to look. And if you kind of like Louisville, like Texas prevented the Big 12 from adding Louisville however many years ago. And again, I've said this every year and I continue to say it. Everybody always was like big, bad, evil Missouri. Like Missouri is not big and bad. Like we're not evil. Texas has always been the evil one. Texas has always been the one that's like kind of like spiked the punch for the rest of the Big 12 and made things difficult to proceed in a forward-looking fashion. I think it's always because they were always considering other options, whether that be going independent or now they're actually going to the SEC. And that was a big missed opportunity to add Louisville when they were out there. I not the biggest, but they would have been, I would argue, a stronger addition even than what we ended up with at the time. It'd be close, but they have a lot of positives going for them. And everybody just thought, oh, well, the ACC would never add Louisville because they're academics. And that was, again, kind of slow reactionary thinking, which in recent years, the Pac-12 has been the most slow reactionary group of all the groups. So it's kind of nice to be in a different position, I guess.
Can I ask you guys if you would speak to this? Because I'd love to hear you expand on this thought. In the evolving marketplace, what have we seen in terms of a change from emphasis on so-called TV sets to specific markets, and how much is that different even than the first merry-go-round in 2010 or so?
Well, and with streaming and all the different ways of consuming content, I mean, I wondered, I think USC is a strong pickup for the Pac-12, and the UCLA is their travel partner. But, Rutgers has not been the big addition to the Big Ten that everybody thought it was, because they supposedly controlled the New York TV market. And Tim's brought this up. I mean, K-State has a passionate fan base. You have people that are, you don't have to be tethered to cable TV is dying. I mean, you look at the top rated TV shows in terms of viewership, and the numbers are just staggeringly down from 1 year, 2 years, 5 years ago, because more people are consuming their content different ways. So I think cable households is probably much more in the past than it used to be. Now, you never know what the decision makers are going to look at, but I think, yeah, that would be a mistake to overly focus on it. And we'll see what UCLA, UCLA has a name. Traditional basketball is as good as anybody. They're in a location, but nobody goes to their games. We'll look at the data. I don't think their TV presence is all that either, from what I remember from what we did.
Middle of the pack, I mean, not any better or worse than K-State
Yeah.
statistically.
Yeah.
So this has changed so dramatically from 10 years ago. Because if you wonder why your cable bills are outrageous, there's 4 letters why. ESPN. You're paying for ESPN, you're paying for 2, you're paying for you're paying for news. And the whole goal 10 years ago, adding Rutgers, was we're going to require all of those TV providers in that New York, New Jersey area to have us. So if you are not interested in sports at all, you're still paying for ESPN. it's a hostage situation, basically, where you're paying a ransom just to have your cable and it's all going to ESPN. They were making billions of dollars off of that. That model's changed because your generation and guys like me are cutting the cable, saying I'm going streaming, and now it's all about streaming. And this is something Vahe can talk about, is streaming's now beginning to get aggressive, but they're all kind of like, will this work? Now, Vahe's much older than me. We can go back to the day when we added cable. And my parents were all used to, antenna. How am I going to get the game if it's on ESPN? It's hard for you to understand. That was the concern. Now we're going through it again with streaming, as an older generation, like Vahe, is wondering how to add streaming into their, watching all the time.
Hey, listen, it's maybe, oh, were you done, Tim? I want to make sure you get the full case against me out there. Now, listen, I am the exact right example on this, because I am certainly not tech proficient, try to figure out what I can to get things done. But look, I'm still mad at Google Fiber for forcing me to go to YouTube TV. I didn't sign up for that. It affects how I scroll. It affects how I order things. Really bothers me. So I'm your target audience on this. And, frankly, I've had a hard time adjusting. I really have. Instead of trying to figure out how I can watch the Royals, I just go to more games when they're home, because I can't crack the code. And that is symptomatic of, I don't want to say everybody over 60, but I think it's fair to say anybody roughly my age and older. And I'm going to flip this back on you guys in Manhattan, because I got talking with a college athletics official the other day, and we were talking specific to the K-State fan base, that, the streaming world, and at least if you're thinking about in a rural sense, not specifically Kansas State, but that's not what anybody signed up for or wants, right? I want to turn on my TV and see the screen that tells me my solutions, and I hit the button. So I say flip it on you, but I do wonder if you're feeling any consumption anxiety among again, basically people my age and older, with what the future holds on K-State accessibility.
Connectivity out west, huge issue. Getting fiber out there. I know WTC here in town is getting fiber into more rural areas around here. It's a big part of it. And the same thing that people went through, didn't have cable if you were in a rural area back in the day. But the seismic thing that happened this year was the NFL sold its Thursday night rights to Amazon. So the Chiefs and Chargers were on Amazon a couple weeks ago. It was their first game. And they've done something cool. They allow a local station to have it, so everyone in the market will have it, even if they don't have Amazon. But if you're outside the market, which we were, because we don't have Kansas City stations, you had to watch it on Amazon Prime. What happened? Amazon Prime had their biggest membership sign up in its history. No Black Friday, no Prime Day, nothing matched what happened when the NFL came to Amazon Prime. That is a green light to every streaming service. If you get the right product, you put it in the right place. But this isn't a Saturday where there's 20 games on or 10 games on, and you forget about K-State Tech or on ESPN Plus because you've got 5 games right here on ESPN and the Fox channel. You forget that. Amazon has the game on Thursday night. There's no other competition. There might be a college game. If you want to watch the NFL, you got to have it. And I think we're going to see that replicated. And I know Amazon's sniffing around the Big Ten for further expansion, Pac-12 and the Big 12. But I don't think they want those third tier, those lesser games. They want premium games they can put on. So this is going to get really interesting because all these entities are going to come in now.
And then again, once again, I mean, the Big Ten has basically sold almost their entire package. The Big 12, that's you want to have competitors, right? You want to have people bidding your rights up, and whether you go with Amazon Prime or not, Big 12's negotiating their media. We don't even want to call them TV rights deals anymore, right? They're media rights deals. And that's a big player, and they can't get the SEC, and they really can't get much with the Big Ten or the ACC, given the way those contracts are worked out. So it could be another advantageous position for the conference. I'm just curious, who in here subscribes to cable television? That is a 0. One,
Wow.
whatever, okay, okay, two people subscribe to cable television.
Wow.
Parents subscribe to cable television. Okay, that's a few more, but still a minority. I mean, it's, I'm trying to get my parents to go to, well, my mother, now, and I think we'll get that done to go to YouTube TV, but it's been a big, you know, a big thing. I'll be in Missouri this weekend. The last time I was in Missouri and K-State was on ESPN Plus. Maybe I was the only one that this happened to, but it just kept resetting. It would not show. And my buddy in Columbia, he was wanting to scout and he couldn't watch it either. So I don't know what's wrong with it, but I don't know. Hopefully we'll be able to see the game Saturday. Yeah.
Hey,
go
by the
ahead.
way, can I interject with a, here's a real-time assessment from somebody in Kansas City about tonight's Amazon broadcast. Oh my God, the Amazon Prime Thursday Night Football stream is freezing, lagging, completely cutting out, nonstop. Anyone else having issues? I will add that she is half my age.
Oh my.
45?
Oh. We have a question from the audience.
Hee.
Get to. Identify yourself, please.
Hi, my name is Brett, and it's like came up in the discussion earlier with like YouTube TV and maybe trying to get people to cut the cord. And like I had that conversation with like my parents and something like major like thing to them was like, oh, I can't watch the Royals now because of their deal with Valley Sports and Sinclair Media. And like I don't know if there's like any other negotiations with like universities and maybe the MLB on like those media rights deals. I know that like the one that they just signed with the Royals.
Well, and those networks may not be around much longer, or they're in major. Andrew could probably talk about that better than I can, but they may keep the rights, but you know they're on the verge of bankruptcy, and they may be selling those rights to MLB Network, or maybe you probably know more about it than I do, Andrew.
Yeah, I can just talk. So about, so Tim mentioned ESPN is like the biggest culprit for kind of where we're at today with how cable TV has declined. The second biggest would be these regional sports nets collectively, not like working together, but if you added up the sum of all those parts over the years, they were the second worst after the ESPN family of networks. They were charging, on a per subscriber per month basis, they were charging ungodly fees for stuff that frankly wasn't that valuable. And I think now we're learning in hindsight that was indeed the case. And so, yeah, they're spiraling out of control. They keep jacking up those rates. But they can't keep up with the decline in reach that they have. And so it's just eventually going to reach zero. Well, not zero, but when the writing's on the wall that it will reach zero, they'll have to go bankrupt.
Are they offering their own streaming now? Is that right? I believe.
Yes.
Buy it, can't get it on TV or
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
No, I know it's bad. It's really, I mean, I'm a Cardinal fan. And I'm just like the MLB package is pretty reasonable.
When you live outside of the area of the Cardinals, it's really, $100 for the whole year or something is not so bad, or whatever. I forget what it costs, but
When I was living in Arizona, we had the Diamondbacks every night on YouTube TV, and then when we lost Valley Sports, I ended up watching the Diamondbacks. I watched the Royals all year.
yeah, that's, you have to, I mean, no offense to the Royals, but at some point. Yeah, I mean, it's like, it's, you have to drive demand at some point, and so that becomes difficult when you're struggling. Yeah, go back.
So there's another, I've seen a couple articles on it, and it's kind of a little bit off subject, but might still relate. What's your thoughts on college football splitting, the rumors of college football splitting off from the NCAA and having the CFP run college football?
Well, the bowl games have always been exempt from NCAA regulations. And so the NCAA kind of has some control over the regular season suspensions and things like that. I think that's been alluded to a few times before. I mean, I could certainly, the conferences may demand it. And, the one thing the NCAA still has is that $1 billion a year in the NCAA basketball tournament. Nobody really wants their school to not participate in the NCAA basketball tournament either. So there is at least a game theoretical reason to kind of stay together there. And so how far will each side push it becomes the question. Yep. Bueller. been going almost an hour, so we can drop and introduce people, talk to people individually if you have individual questions. Okay. Any last questions for the group? I just, again, we mentioned this earlier. This is the third year in a row we've done this, and probably do it next year if everybody's willing. I mean, it's just such a dynamic situation, obviously so important to all of us, that I say things with some confidence, but it's a very unpredictable situation as well. I mean, it's hard to be too surprised by what happens. I should have seen probably the UCLA and the USC thing coming, but the timing of it, I guess, is more of what it was. But as we talked about, when these TV contracts come up, you usually see movement a couple of years in advance. So I guess if, we make it through to 2025, then maybe we're good to 2027, until the Big Ten comes back in 2030 or whatever. But, it's a very dynamic thing. So, yeah. Any other questions for the group?
The big thing next is TV rights. Pac-12 is talking to what's ESPN. ESPN and Fox had their rights, and the product's so wonderful, Fox said, we're out of here. We want nothing to do with it. Literally, we're not bidding. We don't want you. So now ESPN is the only one bidding. Guys are economists, you know how that works. And they're lowballing. So they're trying to get Amazon involved. Meanwhile, the Big 12 has opened up early, and every indication, and I think our friend Dennis Dodd reported on this, that the Big 12 is hearing that their numbers are going to be somewhere between 50 and 70 million a school, which at 60 million would be twice as much as what the Pac-12 schools are getting. And still not comparable to the Big 10 and SEC, but greater than the ACC, which is in a bad contract for an extended period. So at that point, you will see Pac-10, 12, whatever the number is now, schools say, we want in, because nobody's getting invited. I don't invite you to the party because you belong to someone else in terms of a conference. You have to say, hey, I want to join your party. Can I come over? So that's what's going to happen next. And Arizona will be the first to go. They're ready to go. They're so done with the Pac-12 and the whole chaos that's been out there. And then the dominoes will start to fall. But you get into the Pac-12 arrogance, Cal and Stanford, we don't want anything to do with the Big 12 schools. And that's why no one got invited last year, because academically, they didn't want anything to do with them. So in turn, they're going to end up inviting Boise State, which is historically awful academically, and other schools that don't measure up either. So it's just kind of funny how all of a sudden academics don't matter as much. Like, we want a buck.
Yeah, and if you're looking for the schools, like I feel like we have a general idea of K-State's path in the future. It may be in a 14-team Big 12, it may be in a 12-team Big 12, it may be in a 16 or 18-team Big 12. It's almost certainly in the Big 12, and it's going to be a player. Like California could be in the Big 10 if Notre Dame insists on it, and Stanford could be in the Big 10 if Notre Dame insists on it, or they could be in a conference that is not competitive at all, and probably won't be getting into the college football playoff, as I think one of the top 6 conference champions are going to be in this playoff in the future. They may be completely out by themselves. And again, it's to our benefit at K-State that the Pac-12 has always kind of looked down on us because they didn't try to poach last year when the Big 12 was a little bit shaky after Oklahoma and Texas left. There was some instability there that I think is much less unstable, much more stable today. That's probably a better way to put it. So. You see people observing their awesome Econ Club t-shirts. We're happy about that. Again, last chance for questions. And again, we're almost at 8 o'clock, so we'll be happy to stick around and talk to everybody. Yes. Can we get the microphone there?
Yes, I'm Max Urick. I'm the retired athletic director of Kansas State. I served from a long time ago, really. It was back when the Big 12 just started. And I might add a comment to the impact that Arkansas had on the formation of the Big 12. Here, they were a charter member of the Southwest Conference, and they were the only non-Texas school in the Southwest. And they felt kind of put down, and they were put down. They didn't receive the considerations in anything. And so they inquired about, this would be about
92, I think,
92? Yes, correct.
South Carolina.
Well, it started before that, Dan. It started like in 88 when we first caught when I was the athletic director at Iowa State before I came here. And the request came to informal behind the obvious behind the desk, so to speak. And no one got too excited. But before we had those machines up there and these machines here, things didn't move very fast.
Yeah.
It was all by phone and all in person. We organized our meetings around championship events and the bowl games, the basketball tournaments, and things didn't move quite as fast as they have in the last year. Yesterday.
Yeah.
I mean, really, it's amazing how long and drawn out. And I remember sending Jim Corbridge. He was a faculty rep from Colorado. The faculty reps were vitally involved in a lot of these discussions and negotiations. And that was, I have another comment about how much I think, just my opinion, how much the presidents and boards of trustees have let us all down in letting this thing go crazy. And I regret that. And I was part of it. I mean, I let it happen. I didn't put up my hand and say, whoa, not so fast here. But I lost my point here. What was I talking?
Well, I mean, I'll just state, and maybe it'll get your point back, like the future of the history of college athletics would be so different had Arkansas and possibly another school joined the Big 8 in the early 90s, because that preceded the Big 12 in 96 when Arkansas and South Carolina joined the SEC.
Yes.
It'd be an amazing, and then you would have this resistance because people that have associated with Texas, like Texas A&M said, oh, we're going to stop Texas from joining the SEC. And then they kind of got put in their place. Missouri wasn't thrilled about it. I know that because we had our problems with Texas as well, but
the politics of Texas got involved. Ann Richards was the governor at the
Baylor, yeah.
time. And she was a Texas Tech graduate.
Baylor, I
No,
believe. Baylor, yeah.
Baylor graduate. And the chairman of the Appropriations Committee was a Texas Tech graduate. And they said, you know, we just wanted, the Big 8 just wanted Texas and
A&M.
no, A&M, yeah, Texas and A&M. And they said, no, you take 4, you take Baylor, you take, because that was Ann Richards' school, Texas Tech,
That would have been the 4, yeah.
Texas and Texas
Texas Tech,
A&M.
yeah. The 2 they really wanted and the other 2. That's interesting.
Yeah, and A&M left and went to the Southeast Conference. But I just thought I'd make a comment.
Well, that's
about that.
fascinating. I appreciate that, Max. Yeah.
Ditto, that weekend Southwest Conference, then eventually the Southwest Conference.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, that was kind of the right. And of course, the Southwest Conference had all those NCAA problems at that time. But yeah, when Arkansas left, the kind of the timetable, the clock
I
started
just
ticking.
feel the amount of money is so seductive to boards of trustees and presidents that they'll sell their soul for solving that red ink.
Yep.
And they never did it.
And they never have. Right. Right.
Hey, Dan, can I just say it's great to hear Max's voice, and I don't know if he can hear me, but please tell him I still appreciate that he always answered his own phone.
That's a positive trait. Absolutely. Well, gosh, I don't think we can.
One thing I did well.
I don't think we can top that. I think we should probably stop here. So, let's thank Vahe and Andrew and Tim for doing that. Vahe, great to see you. I think I'm gonna shut this down, but, again, don't forget. He kids, but he loves you. We all love you.
Thanks,
Vahe.
y'all. Yeah, great, great to see everybody. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. But yeah, don't forget, Econ Club field trip, applications due Wednesday. So we'd love to have some of you go to DC with us. Thanks for coming.